I'm here with Stacy Herbert and Max Keiser. So why don't you guys go ahead and tell us a bit about yourselves and how you got into Bitcoin?
Max and I make the Orange Pill podcast. Every Sunday, we do what is called a full dose, where we have an interview with a Bitcoiner. And every Wednesday, we do a microdose, which is just me and Max live streaming. And we talk about Bitcoin and Renaissance 2.0, which we believe that Bitcoin has heralded in. And we first got into Bitcoin in 2011. And that was because we had already been making a TV show about the financial system and pointing out that central banks were printing wild amounts of money in order to bail out banks. And we were talking about that already. Somebody who was already in Bitcoin reached out to us and he asked us if we had ever heard about Bitcoin. And we had him on the show to talk about Bitcoin. And thus began our Bitcoin journey.
Yeah, that's it. So we've always been making videos and films about bankers and the banks and the problems that they've created. And when Bitcoin came around, it really offered up something new. And we thought about it. We identified it early on as something that could maybe put the bad bankers out of business. And so this has only been growing for 10 years now.
And I might add that Max had invented the Hollywood Stock Exchange with a virtual currency attached to it. And that's the first patented virtual currency. So he was already working on digital currencies, which is how we also understood Bitcoin so rapidly. It's an advancement on the digital currencies that were developed in the mid to late 90s.
So Max said that there were problems that the bank created. What kind of problems?
Well, the banks are able to print money without any constraints. So there's nothing that there's no legal framework or regulatory framework that stops them from just printing money recklessly. And if you look at the problems in the world that you see, and all the protests that are happening around the world, pretty much they all have the same cause, and that is that banks are printing recklessly and wildly, and then they give 90% or more of that money that they print to their friends. And so their friends are, if you see that there's a wealth and income gap in the world, and that's because the banks like to print money and give it to themselves or give it to their friends. And so the global economy has become very broken. I guess you could say it's broken. And the banks are the root cause of this. So that's why we've been kind of focusing on that problem.
And how do you think the world would change if everyone started to use Bitcoin instead of fiat currencies?
Well, one big change would be that you'd have little or no violence, and you'd have a lot more peace. And the reason I say that is because violence, in particular wars, are funded with paper money or bank money or what's called fiat money. And it's easy to start a war because humans tend to be easily agitated and they start to become violent. And what's also even easier is to fund a war. So the wars today are all funded with this paper money. And so it breeds more wars. So violence begets violence. And that's all because of the money printing that makes it very easy to start a war and to keep a war going. When you have Bitcoin, which is finite, absolute finite money, if you start a war, you very quickly run out of money because it's not something you can print into existence and keep your hatred going. So hatred doesn't get monetized, to use a financial term there, but peace does. So peace becomes more of the framework and the backbone of the economy and therefore the society.
I think for your age group in particular, most profound change is in terms of time preference and the ending of time theft. So fiat steals your time, and that is probably the most valuable resource that any human has. That's the most valuable thing you have, is you can never have enough time, and every minute that passes is another minute you'll never have again. So fiat changes basically fiat was stealing our time, stealing our future. The time preference switch that happens with Bitcoin is that you want to start saving for the future. You want to start building toward a better future. Whereas, say, for example, when I was a little bit older than you, the biggest movie targeting the young women age group was Clueless, a
Yeah.
Valley Girl film. Like, I'm a Valley Girl. Yeah. I'm so clueless. I'm so dumb. And you want to put everything on the credit card. You go to the shopping mall, you shop all day, and you have carry bags of clothes, and you're just putting everything on a credit card, consuming, consuming, consuming. And that was the mindset that needed to be fostered to build out that fiat system, because the fiat system needs ever more debt. So the propaganda was to tell you, as a young woman, consume, consume, consume. Don't build for a better future. Don't save for a better future. Don't, have a very high time preference. So this is now, you're not born into that. You're so fortunate to be able to see and be in this world at this time, at this moment in your life, where it's the opposite. It's building a better future. And that's way more positive than the negativity of just consuming and consuming it not considering the cost to your time.
So, how old were you when you realized this was?
Oh, I was so old. No, I was like, I guess we found Bitcoin, like I was in my late 30s already. That's when it was invented. So it wasn't like early 40s, actually, about 40.
Right. So Bitcoin has made this type of thinking more prevalent, and people who are owning Bitcoin talk about it a lot. So the Bitcoin came into existence in 2009, and I would say that one book that came out, Safety and Moose wrote a book called The Bitcoin Standard, and he talks about time preference, high time preference, and low time preference. And that book came out, I think, 3 or 4 years ago. And that was, I would say, the beginning when the Bitcoin community embraced this idea of time preference. So I'd say that's when that became a very important theme in the Bitcoin community.
Sure, because in the early days of Bitcoin, back in 2010, 11, 12, most of the community, not all, but most, saw it as a payments network, as competing with Visa and MasterCard to shop, shop, shop. So we were still in that fiat mindset. That's how we thought. That's what we were brought up with. And it was all about how to consume better, how to spend better. So, in those early days, we hadn't yet understood the, this time preference shift. We hadn't yet seen it as a store of value collectively as a community.
So I'm still confused. When you talk about time preference, what do you mean it consumes our time? Like,
Right. So there's a very famous experiment called the marshmallow experiment. And this experiment is done with children. And the experiment is this. Children are asked the following question using marshmallows. They ask the children, would you like to have a second marshmallow? They give them a marshmallow. Let's see if I remember.
They leave them in a room with
one
a marshmallow.
Then they ask them the question. They'll say, would you like to have? We'll give you a second marshmallow tomorrow if you can wait. How does it go?
So they leave them in a room with one marshmallow,
Right.
and they say, you can eat the marshmallow if you want to. But if you don't eat the marshmallow, when we come back, we'll give you two.
Right.
So most of the kids eat the marshmallow. because they want it now. They want to satisfy it now. Their time preference is high. They prefer the now, like spend it now, take it now while you have the marshmallow in the hand. And then rather than wait for 2 marshmallows. So this is the shift in time preference, is that, you know, you want satisfaction now. You don't want to wait for, 5 years to start accumulating assets or spending your wealth or using your wealth in any way. So
right.
That's why with credit cards, what it's doing is credit cards doesn't give you income, does it? But maybe it gives you access to 1 year's worth of income. So you're like, well, I'm going to spend it today, even though I'll have to pay it off next year or 2 years from now. So I'd rather eat and consume today than wait until next year to consume. So that's the time theft, is by the time, what your grandparents and parents did, our generations, they consumed as a nation and as a global economy the next 50 years. With all that debt was really just taking from the future. So they brought forward 10 years out into the future, 20 years out into the future, 30 years. They brought all of that forward, that productive capacity. And that's what you're seeing now, is the disintegration of all that debt, because people your age are coming on, and how they're trying to sucker you into paying it is those huge university costs all around the world, rising property prices. So it's almost impossible to buy an apartment or a house for any young person. Those sort of things. That's what happened, is the time theft was that, because that's your time theft, is because in order for you to buy a house, or in order for you to get an education, you have to work many, many years spend your time and your energy paying off all those debts. Whereas people in their 50s and 60s and 70s, they didn't have to do that when they were your age. It was all free, or very, very cheap, because there wasn't a huge amount of debt in the system.
Right. So with Bitcoin, a lot of people in this, what they're doing is they are not consuming, and they're putting cash into Bitcoin. So you hear stories, about people who, and Stacy is actually a good example of this. During lockdown and during the last couple of years, every time she went to the mall or the store and was going to buy something, maybe didn't really need it, but instead just bought some Bitcoin. So what's happened is, because of that time preference, the Bitcoin, of course, went up 400 or 500%.
Yeah.
So now, because she was able to be patient and not consume, and that the value goes up a lot higher. So that's what it means about time preference. People who can sit and not consume and just go into debt, and instead accumulate savings in Bitcoin, they end up being rewarded, because this is a currency that's naturally going up in price. So, and we can understand why it would continue to go up in price. So that's what it means. If you can hold off and don't consume now, you can watch your savings go up. And it goes very much against, as Stacy was saying, the culture as a whole is always telling people to consume and to go into debt. Because for example, the economy in the United States is measured with what's called the gross domestic product, or GDP, and that's all tied to consumption and going into debt. And so the people in Washington, D.C. will say, if you don't go into debt, you're going to hurt the economy, right? So they really put out this message that you really need to go into debt. But this is a very bad message, because it takes away your ability and my ability to have our own savings and our own independence by having financial independence. And that's a very important thing to be able to obtain.
It was about 2.5 or 3 years ago, I forget when, but what Max is describing there, what happened to me is I had the Cash app. It's available in the United States on my phone. And it has a debit card for fiat. You can spend fiat. And then it has Bitcoin on it. So it's side by side on the same screen. and I was at a shop, a boutique, and I was about to spend $500 on a little jacket. And I saw the Bitcoin there as well. And I was like, wait, maybe I should just buy $500 worth of Bitcoin instead. So I put the jacket back and bought $500 worth of Bitcoin. So that's also a good way. You know, a lot of people ask, oh, is Bitcoin too expensive to get in? So they're thinking of like converting their $500 sitting there and converting it to Bitcoin. And what if Bitcoin goes down by 30 or 40%? Then they only in their mind have like $300. So over the past 3 years, what I've been doing relentlessly is every time I see an ad pop up for a lovely dress, and I'm like, oh, I want that dress. Oh, it's 400. I go, okay, I'm gonna buy that dress in my mind. I'm gonna spend the 400. I would have had a dress, but instead I have $400 worth of Bitcoin. So in my mind, I don't care if it goes up and down, because all I bought in my mind was that dress, and I have those Satoshis instead. The Satoshis represent the dress. So I'm not even looking at the price. I was going to spend the $400 anyway. Like that was gone out of my mind. So just, I hadn't even looked at my Cash App for all these 3 years until recently. And of course, it's all like really up. And then you start to realize like how much that was time theft. For example, if I had spent all those, you know, all that money on clothes, like maybe I decided not to go out for a $200 meal and I bought Bitcoin instead. So, you know, you see all the value you would have been missing just by participating and consuming mindlessly or cluelessly in the economy.
Yeah. My next question is that I have seen on Twitter that there is like a conflict between like Bitcoiners and people who invest in like other cryptocurrencies. In your own perspective, could you explain?
Sure. It's pretty simple, actually. Whenever you make an investment, there's two things to consider: the reward that you might be getting from that investment, and the risk that you're taking. So with Bitcoin, it has very little risk because it's now capturing a huge portion of the global financial market, and that is just becoming more evident every day. The second you start to look at some of these other what are called altcoins, you are then taking on a huge amount of risk. And in my view, it's not worth the risk. So you might, in a short term, you might see, oh, this is up more than this. But all of these other coins have a reputation of collapsing, blowing up, being hacked. They're not secure. They're centralized, and so it's not worth the risk. That's the bottom line. This is why we don't really talk about anything else.
Partly because of the network effect. So Bitcoin has all of the hash rate. It has all of the miners. It has all of the engineers. It has all of the hodlers. Like there's a way bigger, vaster network effect that secures the system. But it's also important to understand how that altcoin market, because there's 7,000 altcoins. So in the original early days of Bitcoin happened, and you had all these Bitcoin core developers working on it. You know, it's an open source project. Anybody who has the talent can contribute to Bitcoin and help develop it. At the time, there started to then become a war between these core developers, starting in, say, the end of 2010, early 2011, and it really spilled out in 2015 and 16. But there were some core developers who wanted to compete with Visa. They wanted to rapidly build out these second layers. They wanted to have smart contracts. Vitalik was one of those people, but the core developers who won out and the users who won out is like security was the most important to them. So because that was the most important, they go slow implementation of these developments. So the earliest, altcoins, you had Litecoin, which was at that time, back in 2011 and 12, it was appreciated as a kind of test net for Bitcoin that no longer really matters anymore, but it's still, the coin doesn't die, of course, because once it's created, it can't die. Then Ethereum broke out because Vitalik wanted these smart contracts, and he thought of how to pay for it. How to pay for the development was pre-mining. You know, he had a whole bunch of Ethereum that he printed up first and then unleashed it onto the market. So so they were able to finance their operations by getting other people involved. But now that Bitcoin is so much bigger and has so many more companies and people and entities, individuals all developing on it, like it is starting to go faster. You're starting to see the what everybody wanted without any security back in 2011. We now have Lightning Network, we have Strike Global, we have all of these second layer technologies, liquid technology, we have satellites put up by Blockstream. That took time, but you had to have a very, very stable layer one foundation, which the layer one is Bitcoin itself and the Bitcoin blockchain. Now you could have all these other things. Every single thing that any altcoin can do, Bitcoin could do better because the foundation is way more secure than any other altcoin can be.
Do you have any friends or family relatives that do not believe in Bitcoin?
Yeah.
Yes, I would say that when we started, we 100% of all friends and family were against Bitcoin, and over the years, that's become than 100%. And I would say probably at the moment, if you look at our entire universe of friends and family, maybe 5% are support Bitcoin. The other 95% still don't really get it.
It's a revolutionary moment, and revolutions are, it's a foundational change in thinking. So back in the 18th century in Europe, when the Enlightenment happened, most people weren't willing to say our kings are not divine. They had for thousands of years, we believed our kings were divine. They were appointed by God, and God spoke through these kings. Then the Enlightenment came around. Revolutions happened. The French Revolution, the American Revolution separated church from state. So they were two separate entities now. And, it took a lot of people a long time to come to grips with that and understand that they could live, they were equal to any king. Same now with the separation of state and money. Most people are very used to the, give us a stimulus check, bail us out, print up some free money, give us free cash, help us out during this bad time. So they're used to that and they're kind of comfortable. It feels like a life raft that the government will print money for me if times get bad. But that's gone now. Bitcoin has separated the state from money.
So when you talk about it with your friends or family, do you try to convince them, or how does the discussion continue?
I used to, but maybe starting 4 or 5 years ago, I no longer bother, because Bitcoin is something that some people are just genetically unable to comprehend because they cannot make the intellectual leap. And so that's just the fact of life. A lot of people will never understand it. And so there's nothing you can do about that.
Everybody's on their own journey. You can't push them along. They either have to figure it out or not. A lot of people go down that altcoin route, and all you could do is just work on yourself, because you only have control over yourself. So I know what I'm doing and I know what I believe in, and we provide our content and do our content. You either get it or you don't. We can't force you to listen to us. We can't force you to buy Bitcoin. I actually don't want to, because I want to accumulate more Satoshis. So I don't want you to have them. I'd rather have them. And I'm happy for you to go, take your journey and make your mistakes. For me personally, that's how I learn best. Like, some people are smart in a way where they could be told, a professor can tell them about something and they oh, I can understand it in my mind. I tend to go out and make horrible mistakes, disastrous mistakes, lose everything, and go, oh, now I understand why I shouldn't have done that. So that's a lot of people are just on their own journey.
Yeah, yeah, exactly right. And what's interesting is that the people today who don't understand it or don't want to get involved, they hear about the price going up and up and up. So a lot of them will start buying Bitcoin at 50,000, 100,000, 200,000. So it's good that they actually don't get it now because we need people to buy it later, right? So it's just a matter of what price are they going to allow themselves to be changed by what's going on with Bitcoin. I always say you don't change Bitcoin, Bitcoin changes you. And usually, when you hear people who are talking negatively about Bitcoin, they always talk about how it should be changed to make it better, to make it work. And those people, of course, their egos are getting in the way. Eventually, when they figure out that, oh, it's Bitcoin's not doesn't need to change, I have to change, and then they get it, and then they start buying Bitcoin. And this is true for professional economists. You know, they're very world famous Nobel-winning economists who are so egocentric. They still talk about what needs to change about Bitcoin. Someday, some of them will realize, no, Bitcoin's fine. It's they are the ones that need to change, but that could happen at a much, much higher price.
Yeah, I agree. I really like the quote about Bitcoin, about Bitcoin changes you. So what are your plans for the future? Are there any projects which you will work on?
Our Orange Pill podcast is going to take over the world. That's
That's
what we
right.
hope for.
That's right. That's right. That's the plan.
It's we're at the point where we're just pushing the positive future because we do believe we are at the end of a fiat dark ages. I think we'll look back and see that how dark these times were over the past few decades. And I think we're at the beginning of a renaissance, just like we saw in Italy in the 16th century. So I think we're going to see an explosion in great ideas, great people, and just greatness in general. I think we're going to see a more decentralized opportunity and community. If you look into our Orange Pill podcast Telegram group, for example, there's over 14,000 people there at the moment, and they're from all over the world, all sorts of people, and it's a community of like-minded people. We're moving beyond the nation state. For the past these fiat dark ages, we've lived in a very closed-minded nation state era where they are committing all sorts of wars and human rights crimes all over the world, where individuals themselves are kind of trapped without any power, paying taxes and stuck in their mindset of their nation. Whereas now it's just like unleashed opportunity and possibility, and that's an amazing place to be.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, me too. So if a teen wanted to buy Bitcoin right now, what would be the easiest way for them to do so?
I think like I was saying, I think the best thing to start doing is, because Bitcoin is still very young and volatile, I think it becomes, you get all that panic and FOMO and fear, like when prices go up or down very rapidly. So one of the things to do is start to earn it, find ways to earn it. And again, like loads of stuff is available online right now. You go to fiverr.com, and if you know how to code in any way or create a website, you can start earning money and convert it to Bitcoin, or start earning in Bitcoin if possible. Just have somebody pay you directly in Bitcoin, convert what you would have spent already on other things, it like I did with like I'm gonna buy this jacket. No, I'd rather spend Bitcoin and buy it on Bitcoin. So just like in order to keep yourself from like speculating with that $500, just use it as what your consumption would have been. But also, there are loads of places now where you can earn free Satoshis, essentially, Satoshis back. So you can get debit cards. So you can get debit cards, which are great because you can, again, if you have to buy your groceries, you buy your groceries with the debit card and you get Satoshis back. So you're slowly accumulating everywhere. Get an income stream from multiple locations in Satoshis so that your mind isn't worried about how much you're up or down. It's like that's an important thing to try to get around.
Yep, absolutely. Like take it slowly, and I like the idea of getting satoshis back when you're using a debit card or a credit card. There's an app called Fold, Fold, and they send you a card, and every time you use the card, you get back satoshis. So that's a really easy way to just accumulate. Also, they have a cool thing on the app where you spin the wheel and you can win free satoshis. And I've had it for a couple of weeks. I've won, I think, 60,000 satoshis. So that's great. Yeah. So there's a lot of ways to kind of inch your way in there and get some satoshis, get you started.
Yeah, because it doesn't take many Satoshis. Like, say, $10 worth is 25,000 Satoshis. So, it's the most important thing is your mindset, how you start to see time and the world around you and the financial system around you. That's invaluable. That's the best thing about Bitcoin. And so if you could focus on that and what it does to your mind and how you're preparing for the future, rather than trying to chase the price, that only leads to regret and negative feelings.
So this debit card that you were talking about, is there like a certain age that you have to be?
I believe you have to be 18,
Oh.
and close enough. You don't have too much time to wait, but let's see. Well, how about you? Like, how did you come to Bitcoin, and what do you hope to get from it?
Well, my dad is a huge fan, believes in Bitcoin, and he started to get the whole family involved into it. And now we all have our Bitcoin wallets, and I guess we're just hoping for the price to go up.
Well, and you're in Thailand, so of course the Thai baht is way more volatile. So, you know, most Americans don't necessarily understand the danger of fiat because we are the reserve currency. So places where you have a more volatile currency that could swing, I remember Max and I were in business working, in different industries that got really affected by, in 1997, there was a huge currency crisis across Asia. Like all those currencies just collapsed. And it was in Bangkok. Bangkok had a huge one, right? The construction just stopped like overnight. There was a big boom there and then it crashed. And, that sort of volatility drives a lot of people to Bitcoin. They find Bitcoin when their entire financial system or their whole monetary system collapses overnight.
So I have one more question before we finish, and that is if you could give uh, one advice to any teenager who's listening to this right now.
Well, yeah, I think we've said it. We nailed it. This is an excellent time to start building a Bitcoin savings and to think about it as something you're going to keep adding to for 10, 20, 30 years. And that's just a great start. So it's lucky that people, teenagers, have this opportunity at this time. As messed up as the world is in some respects, that is a very great thing that is available now to teenagers. So that's just to get it started. Take that first step.
And I would also say, again, when I was a teenager and all the way up until, say, 5 years ago, any teen, what they're competing with each other is having the best shoes or the best jacket or the best clothes or the best hairdo or things like that. And that's in the Bitcoin world, you would say to that person, have fun staying poor, because that should no longer be a status symbol. You should look at that and say, that fool spent $500 on those sneakers. I bought $500 worth of Satoshis instead. And that is a way to start thinking and stop worrying about all of that consumer economy that, you know, sells you these $500 sneakers that you are no longer usable in a year because they've gone out of fashion and they want you to buy a new one, and you're considered really naff if you wear the ones from last year and like a dork. But, you know, keep on stacking sats and be prepared for good times. You know, people are always warned to be prepared for bad times, like have, you know, some anti-fragility, but you also have to be prepared for good times. You are in for the best generation. Like 17-year-olds today, you like the next 10, 15, 20 years are going to be historic. It's going to be like being in Florence in the late 1300s, early like from 1300 to 1450 sort of period. Like that whole period, if you were there, like you were in for the most amazing time that still lasts to this day. People look back in awe on that. And people are going to look back in 100 years onto this period of time and go, oh my God, imagine being alive then and being one of those people who got to be one of the Bitcoin pioneers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Sounds exciting. Well, thank you guys very much for doing this podcast with me. I appreciate it a lot. I'm very excited.
Thank you for having us, and you know, welcome to the Bitcoin journey. It's a fun one.
Yes, yes, it's great to meet you, and it sounds exciting. It's always exciting to meet new folks. So yeah, now we have another friend in Bitcoin. So that just added to our universe of people that we know in Bitcoin.
And we love Thailand. So if we're ever there, we'll look you up if this COVID thing ever ends.
Yeah, no. Well, next time we're in Thailand, we'll definitely get together, and sounds like fun.
Sounds great. Thank you.